Welcome to the Daily Beef for Week 3 presented by Rosters.com. Be sure to use promo code CURVE for an instant $20 deposit or bonus on your initial deposit. I'm Josh Kalachi here with my co-host, as always, Adam Pfeiffer, and today we're talking about wide receivers. We'll discuss a quick positional review for Week 2, our top 3 for this week, everybody's question asking AB, Antonio Brown, or Julio Jones, and of course we always wrap up with a sleeper at our position. We're also going to talk about, real quick, I want to talk about Week 2 because a lot of stuff happened last week. If you paid up at running back, you won all the money. The top 3 finishers at wide receiver last week, Stefon Diggs and both Benjamins, Travis and Kelvin. Right behind them was Corey Coleman, who unfortunately broke his hand in practice this week. But we learned that all of these guys are cheap, and they did score touchdowns. So you can find value at wide receiver early this year. That's what we saw in Week 1 with Willie Snead, Jordan Matthews, and Will Fuller. So it's a good time to pounce this early season on some cheap receivers. Find the guys that are going to score, pay up at good positions, and you can win a lot of money. That's what we saw in winning lineups for Week 1 and Week 2, especially last week. Now let's dive into Week 3 here. We're talking about receivers, and I know there's a lot of them to get to. So Adam, who are your top 3? Start with number 1.
Yeah, obviously we'll leave the aforementioned AB and Julio out. For me, I was really pleased and encouraged by what I saw from Dak Prescott and Dez Bryant last week. Dez only had 2 or 3 targets in Week 1, and now in Week 2, 12 targets. So that's really encouraging to me, especially when you consider that in Week 1, Dak Prescott averaged just over 5 yards per attempt, which is 2 full yards below the league average from last season. Last week in Week 2, it was around 9, and he completed 7 passes that went 10 or more yards down the field. Well, 5 of them were to Dez Bryant. So when he went down the field, it was to Dez. I think they'll be able to do that again against this really banged up Chicago defense. They're missing a lot of guys right now. Tracy Porter's really their only cornerback that really has played decent and is healthy right now. I just think Dez and the Cowboys can do whatever they want in this game. The Bears have allowed 4.5 red zone scoring attempts per game this season, which is bottom 5 in the NFL. And we know when they get inside the 5, they're looking for Dez Bryant. He had 3, I believe, end zone targets that were, Dak Prescott needs to work on his fade. 2 of them were thrown out of bounds where Dez couldn't even try to make the catch. But they're taking shots, which is all I really need to see when you have the guy as talented as Dez Bryant. So I think the Cowboys can actually do whatever they want on offense in this game with the way their offensive line is and how banged up the Bears' defense is. So I think Dez Bryant is a guy that, again, when you have the big 3 wide receiver, anybody outside of that is going to be, relatively lower owned. So I think Dez Bryant is a guy I'm really interested in, probably for the first time this year.
Last week you mentioned that being a factor on Andre Hopkins was a nice play, and we saw another good game from him as well. So that is an excellent option to look at that there. Dez Bryant, I'm a big fan of him myself. My top receiver this week, of course, other than those top 2 that we will be talking about before too long, Allen Robinson. Now, he hasn't checked in the 2016 yet, but I think this is the week it's coming. There's just too many factors going his way. The targets are there. He's seen 20 in 2 games, including 15 in Week 1. Last week, he saw 5, but we talked about Jason Verrett before, and he really bottled up Allen Robinson for most of the game last week. The way I look at Robinson this year is, although he has struggled, he's faced a number 1 corner in both games, especially against Verrett, who we just mentioned. This week, he only sees Jimmy Smith. Now, Jimmy Smith came into the league as a decent man corner, but he's allowed a lot of fantasy points by himself, basically, over the last 2 years. Last season, the Ravens allowed 26 touchdowns to receivers, the second in the NFL. That's a ton. If there's anything we know about Robinson, it is his ability to score in the end zone. I know Adam mentioned last week he has one of the highest numbers in end zone targets in the NFL. The Jags throw the ball an absolute ton. I've mentioned before about how the Jaguars come from behind in a lot of their games, but volume is volume no matter how do you get it in DFS. And for me, he is far too cheap. He has similar upside as those guys we mentioned before with those Julios, with the Beckhams. He has that upside. He really does. But his price is almost $2,000 cheaper than a lot of them. So for this week, a guy playing 90% of the snaps against Jimmy Smith, I'm on board, definitely, in GPPs, maybe even in cash games.
Yeah, no beef here. I'm actually going to be using one of these 2 receivers we'll debate in a little bit, and Robinson in a lot of my lineups. If you're in a seasonal league, this is your last chance to buy low on Allen Robinson. I think this is the game he breaks free. Not only did you mention the end zone targets, which he's among the league leaders in since the start of last season. When he gets targeted, it's down the field, and we saw Corey Coleman and the Browns generate a ton of big plays against this Ravens secondary last week. So the Jaguars offense looks to get back on track here. I think this is the last week Robinson struggles, and if you're not on board, I think you're going to miss out. So no beef with Allen Robinson. My second guy, there's a lot of guys to choose from, but I'm interested in Amari Cooper here. I like targeting receivers against Tennessee because they're a funnel defense. For those of you who are not sure what funnel defense is, it's a defense where they're very good at stopping the run in this situation, which they are. Their front is very strong. It's the strongest part of their defense, but their secondary is leaky. Their corners aren't that strong, which means for a team like the Raiders that are throwing the ball a good amount, Derek Carr has 83 pass attempts through 2 weeks. If they struggle to run the ball here, you're going to see a lot of from Cooper and Michael Crabtree. And number one receivers have gotten off to a very good start against Tennessee. You saw Stefon Diggs go for over 100 yards in week one against this unit. Marvin Jones went well over 100 yards last week against them. And Amari Cooper can make the case is better than both those guys in terms of talent and the offense that they're in. So I think Amari Cooper is going to be at 7,700 when you have guys like Allen Robinson, $200 cheaper. Jordy's down there cheaper. Alshon's only $300 more expensive. I don't know how high his ownership is going to be, and I think he has a pretty safe floor in this spot with Derek Carr throwing the football. And also, the knock on Cooper last year was he was not getting targets in close. 0 targets inside the 10 last year. So far this year, he already has 2. So good to see them looking for him in the red zone more. Definitely going to be interested in Amari Cooper here in this spot.
It's interesting you mentioned him because I'm a big fan of his as a player, but for this week and week 2, this is our next beef, Adam. I just don't think I can use Amari Cooper in this spot given his price. You mentioned his price was similar to Allen Robinson. You mentioned Alshon Jeffries in a similar light as well. But I think if you're spending up there, you might as well go a couple more $100 elite guys or a little bit less and get Allen Robinson. The way I look at it is when you're looking at this team, I know you mentioned that he does have those 2 targets inside the 10, and that's good. But that still means this year and last year it's only at 2. I like to look at it from more of a macro level. I know that with this week or with this season so far, like you mentioned, the 2 is definitely a big plus. But he hasn't scored a touchdown yet this year. I know that was his issue last year, was scoring a bunch of touchdowns, seeing those red zone targets. So for me, I'm not sure I can pay that price for a guy like that. Considering Allen Robinson, unfortunately, only has 1 target in the red zone as well, you know he's going to score touchdowns. He's the guy that they're targeting in the end zone. So for me, it just comes to the price point. You're going to be looking at a guy like Cooper. I would always take a guy like Allen Robinson at a little bit cheaper. So I can't pay for Cooper. That's our first receiver beef.
I will say he's an awesome tournament play because anybody that's priced awkwardly like that in between where he's at an elite level but he's not like a mid-tier or cheap or bargain level type player, I think they're awesome tournament plays. So I think Cooper goes for 100 a touchdown here. That's my bold-ish call.
It's not a bad way to look at it. I mean, I know you mentioned considering the fact that he's in that price, and a lot of people when they make lineups will think that. They will see Amari Cooper, Allen Robinson's right there, or Alshon Jeffries right there. You have to think about it from that perspective. A lot of people make their lineups on the sites themselves. So when you see that, you know he's going to be underowned in this game flow, in this game script. It could be a good play. So I'm not going to knock you there. I do think that he is a good tournament play because of ownership. But for me personally, I just can't use him this week. Who's your next guy?
My third guy would be down a little bit. He's been doing it for years, but he's still underpriced. He's under 7K on DraftKings. Larry Fitzgerald. I've talked about 3 members of the Cardinals in these beefs, which is interesting because they're playing against my Bills. But did you see the Bills on Thursday night? They could not cover anybody. Couldn't cover anybody down the field. They let Fitzpatrick, who's not known for his deep passing, just tear them up. And Fitzgerald is a guy right now. Michael Floyd and John Brown really aren't playing at a high level. Fitzgerald's been outstanding. He's got 3 touchdowns through 2 weeks, 13 catches, 158 yards. Leads the NFL so far through 2 weeks in targets from inside the 10-yard line with 5. They're throwing a lot of fades to him. I think he's going to have plenty of scoring opportunities. And remember, since Bruce Arians has gone there, since taking over the head coaching duties, he's kind of moved towards into the slot role a little bit more. And that's the matchup you want against Buffalo. I know Stephon Gilmore and Darby were lit up, but they're still 2 very strong corners in my opinion. And if in the slot, he'll be seeing a lot of Nickel Roby-Coleman, who's not very, not a very good player in terms of coverage ability. And Larry Fitzgerald, we know, is just so smart and so precise with his routes and has the best hands in the NFL. He will make an inexperienced player like that kind of look stupid half the time, in all honesty. So at 6,900, I'm probably going to play Fitzgerald again here until his price gets to where it's somewhere where I'm not comfortable. And right now, it's just not at a point where I'm uncomfortable playing him.
It's interesting you mentioned the slot there, and that's exactly why I think it's perfect that you mentioned those three guys before I mentioned my second. Is what I'm thinking here is my last two guys, I kind of package them together. Jarvis Landry and Stefon Diggs. Both of these guys work out of the slot a lot. And I'm going to talk about Landry real quick. He's my guy this week. He's going to be in every one of my cash lineups. I can say that absolutely for 100% certain. And it's going to continue for a long time. I've had him a lot in cash last year, beginning of this year. He's one of these guys in PPR you just know you're going to get those catches. His floor is immaculate. Since week 8 of last season, Landry has caught 6 or more passes in 10 to 12 games. That's incredible. He's seen at least 10 targets in 6 straight games. He leads the NFL in catches so far this season through 2 weeks. He's third in targets. When I look back at his game log, even against number one corners or teams that may have or may have not shadowed them, Landry has succeeded. 13 catches for 165 against the Jets last year, 8 catches against the Chargers and Barrett, 7 for 111 against Indianapolis last year when Vontae Davis played. So some people may be afraid of Joe Hayden, but for me personally, I'm not. Jarvis Landry is one of these guys that's going to catch a lot of balls, and for me, I have to cap that in cash games, especially against the Browns, who have allowed 40 PPR points per game so far this season. So he's a lock in cash. But I talked about the other guy real quick in Stefon Diggs. Both of these guys are very similar for me. The problem is Stefon Diggs is $5,100. We saw what he did last week. Guy absolutely exploded. He has 16 catches on 20 targets for 285 and a touchdown already this year. Something's up with the pricing algorithm because he is not priced where he should be. He's far too cheap. I think he's another guy to lock in your cash games with Landry. The reason why I wanted to talk about them together, you can have both of them combined for about 11,000 right now, 11,700 on DraftKings and PPR. Considering Antonio Brown's almost 10,000, I'm going to take those two guys and pair him with another guy and probably get one of the highest floors at receiver, which is excellent at cash games. We talked about earlier on another beef where Stefon Diggs is going to get to rookie corner. So all those things factoring in, Diggs, Landry, those two, I'm playing them in cash games. What about you?
Yeah, I'm on board 100% with both those guys. Stefon Diggs is a top 5 receiver in fantasy right now, and on both sides, he's priced outside the top 30 at the position. So that alone screams value. And you talked about pairing Landry and Diggs together. You're essentially getting 20 catches for $11,000. Like, they're probably going to catch 10 balls in their respective games. Diggs will see 2 rookie cornerbacks wherever he's lined up. He's just known for getting open. So with Bradford, if he's under a lot of duress again, it's going to be a lot of checkdowns to Diggs and company. And Landry against the Browns, I already talked about Tannehill on the quarterback beef, so I'm obviously going to be interested in his number one target. Devontae Parker's back, but I don't think it's going to take away too much from him. So absolutely zero beef with those guys. I'm going to be having them a lot as well.
It brings us to our next topic here. And I think we will have a little bit of a beef here. The problem is, between these two, it's almost like picking between your two favorite places to eat or your two best friends to hang out with. It's one of these things where you can't go wrong with either of them, but in the same light, you can go wrong with either of them. You pick one or the other, and the other one blows up. You're really going to be kind of climbing those standings with a negative advantage. So it's one of these things that we have to discuss this week. Adam, for those playing the all-day slates or the all-slate with Monday as well, I know there's a lot of sites that have Sunday and Monday in their main slates. Antonio Brown or Julio Jones? Who do you like this week between these two?
Yeah, Julio's obviously in the better spot, but I just can't envision Antonio Brown having back-to-back games. The Bengals matchup has always been, they've never shut him down until really Sunday, but they've always played him differently than other teams. They double him more than anybody else, and they play him relatively well, all things considering. So Antonio Brown, in those muddy conditions, didn't have his best game by any means. Still had 11 targets. I just think against this Eagles secondary, another funnel defense. Not that it matters because DeAngelo Williams is going to get his touches regardless, but Antonio Brown is just going to light up the Eagles' corners, whether it's Jalen Mills, whether it's Ron Brooks, whether it's Leotis McKelvin if he's healthy. Like, there's just nobody on this team that can cover him, whereas the Bengals have some strong corners in Jay Kirkpatrick and Adam Jones. And granted, Julio Jones obviously has a better matchup, but I'm a little bit worried about Julio's ongoing injuries to the point where where a guy like Antonio Brown, who's so safe, I will slightly prefer him over Julio. Julio is obviously number two for me. He's right there, but I just can't picture Antonio Brown having back-to-back rough games, and these corners for the Eagles are not going to be able to cover him.
It's interesting you mentioned that because I'm going to start this beef, which we definitely have between these two guys, by talking about Antonio Brown. Normally I would just argue the contrary in Jones, but Antonio Brown faces this Eagles secondary who, I agree, their talent is not up to par with their corners. But through 2 games this year, they've allowed the 4th least amount of fantasy points to receivers. Now, with that being said, I know it's the Browns and the Bears, but there is some talent there with Corey Coleman, Terrell Pryor, who's in the position, of course, Alshon Jeffrey. The Eagles have not allowed a touchdown to receiver yet this year. So it's interesting to look at. Now, I know Antonio Brown and this Big Ben run offense is a little bit of a different machine than the Browns and the Bears, but that's something that I think is worth noting because if I'm going to spend up on a guy that costs this much, I want a perfect situation, and I think what I think we have in Julio Jones on Monday night. Nobody on the Saints can cover this guy. I don't think anybody in the NFL really can cover this guy one-on-one. But if you look at last year against the Saints, Julio Jones had 15 catches on 21 targets for 250 yards. That was with Delvin Breaux, who is a very solid cover man. He's out. He's not going to play for the rest of this year. And Julio Jones basically is going to be lining up against people that can't really cover an average NFL receiver. We know how good Julio Jones is. So for the same price this week, I'm going the route of Julio over Antonio Brown because I do think this Eagles defense is a little bit better than people give him credit for. Not to discount Antonio Brown's ability, but I need a perfect situation if I'm paying up for a guy that expensive. So for me, I'm going to go with Julio Jones on Monday night on turf against the Saints.
I just want Julio to get more targets. He's outside the top 40 in targets right now, which is really odd. So that alone right there, plus a little bit of concern with health. He's fine. He's not going to miss the game, but it seems like every single week Julio Jones, towards the beginning of the 4th quarter, he limps off the field, and then you're panicking for 45 seconds to a minute. So I think Antonio Brown, him having back-to-back rough games is not going to happen. So they're both obviously elite plays. I'll slightly lean Antonio Brown though, just based off volume.
Adam, we might have to settle this beef by each of us making the same exact lineup, but I'll use Julio and you use AB, and maybe we'll figure it out. The loser maybe I'll wear a Bills T-shirt on a show or something next week.
Yeah, we could. That'd be interesting. That'd be really interesting. And I don't know where you'd get a Bills shirt, but good luck.
I'll have to find it somewhere here in Delaware. Believe it or not, we actually do have stores here in the small state. So moving on to our sleeper here, wide receiver sleepers. We talked about earlier in the show that week 2 and week 1, we saw a lot of sleepers come through. Corey Coleman scored some touchdowns. Will Fuller's been great. This is the area we have to find these players to succeed because we're paying up a running back or quarterback or even tight end. You're going to have at least one cheap receiver. So, Adam, your sleeper wide receiver this week, who is it and why?
Yeah, I'm really interested in Sterling Shepherd. He's played really well for the Giants. Obviously, not getting talked about as much as Odell Beckham, and kind of Victor Cruz has been playing well too. But he has the best matchup of the Giants receivers this week. There was a report that came out recently that John is going to follow Odell Beckham whenever he lines up outside. So that's a tough matchup. Beckham obviously capable of going off against anybody. And then you have Victor Cruz on the outside, who's going to be going against Rashad Breeland, who's had a rough start to the season, but is still a very good corner. He's faced Des Bryant and Antonio Brown so far. So I think Sterling Shepherd, who's going to line up in the slot, he's tied for second in the league with 11 receptions from the slot. He's going to have the best matchup of the Giants receivers in this game. And I think with this passing offense where the Giants run 3 wide more than anybody in the NFL, relatively high total game, I think he's going to have a great chance to have another 100-yard game here. He had 100 yards in week 2 against the Saints. Eli Manning had almost 400 passing yards with 0 touchdowns. If he throws for that many passing yards again, there's no way one of these receivers, if not all of them potentially, don't find the end zone. So Sterling Shepherd for me, people are going to be all talking about this Odell Beckham-Josh Norman matchup, and I think a lot of people won't even consider the fact that Sterling Shepherd might benefit from it. So 5,500 price tag. He's played well. He's got all 11 of his catches from the slot. I really like Sterling Shepard in this game, averaging 80 yards a game, relatively nice little floor there.
I want to talk about Shepard here because I'm with you. I think the fact that Josh Norman following around Odell Beckham when he's playing outside is going to be one of these very interesting matchups to watch. But people are focusing on that. They're not thinking about the others, and that's exactly where Shepard falls in. Shepard has played 95% of snaps. That's incredible. That's a huge number for receivers. I'm going to talk about some guys that have played a similar amount of snaps as Sterling Shepard. Ready? A.J. Green, Brandon Marshall, Jordan Matthews, Jarvis Landry, Eric Decker, Antonio Brown, and DeAndre Hopkins. That's pretty good company, I'd say. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, it's because the Giants run three wide pretty much all the time, so he's never really going to be off the field.
Yeah, when a guy's not off the field, he has a chance to score on every play. Now, we know the targets are spread across. Odell Beckham gets a lot of targets. Victor Cruz sees some targets. And, of course, the running backs do for the Giants as well. But a guy on the field for 95% of the snaps, you know the Giants are going to have the ball probably 70 or 75 times in terms of using plays. So I want a guy like that for cheap that's going to be on the field not being covered by Josh Norman. So I think it's a very interesting play. Now, my sleeper receiver this week, it's another guy that plays a lot of snaps. There's a bit of a theme here. You guys can see we want guys that play a lot of snaps because you know they're going to have a chance to see opportunity. That's all of what DFS is about. You want guys with opportunity that can succeed. My guy this week, Tajay Sharp for the Tennessee Titans. Everyone's talking about Delaney Walker for good reason. Everybody's talking about Marcus Mariota for good reason. How about the number one receiver? Tajay Sharp faces the Raiders this week. The Raiders can't cover anybody. If either one of us lined up at receiver, we would probably succeed against them. Sean Smith has not looked good. He's been slow. David Amerson can't cover anybody man-to-man, although he's a decent zone cornerback. Tajay Sharp plays in a ton of snaps. The one thing about him, he has 18 targets. That's a good number, but I want to talk about who he's faced. The Vikings and the Lions. The Vikings have some good corners. The Lions have Darius Slay. So this week, he's not seeing anywhere close to that, Sharp being that is. He's going to see a guy for the Raiders, no matter who it is not anywhere close to Slay, not anywhere close to who the Vikings have at corner. So one of these things that I'm looking for, this guy has the potential to have a big game. The reason I talk about that is because of market share. The Raiders have allowed 120 PPR points to receivers this year in 2 weeks. That's absurd. If he even gets 20% of that market share, we know that's going to be much higher. Market share being, for those that don't know, the share of what he's going to have per yard. So if the team has 100 yards and Sharp has 50, that's a 50% market share. 20% market share is vastly too low, but even if he has that, it's proven against the Raiders this year. That is a ton of fantasy points. At just 4,700, I'm going to be looking at him to be these third guys in my lineup that has big upside and GPPs, and I think he's going to be under-owned because a lot of people are looking at Mariota to Delaney. They're going to forget about Mariota to Sharp, so that's a pretty good stack for me.
Yeah, and talking about opportunity and playing time, Tajay Sharp played every single offensive snap for the Titans in week 2. He is their number one receiving option in terms of the wide receivers itself. And I think, I love Mariota, so while I do think Delaney Walker is the preferred option, I think Sharp at his price is in a great spot as well. I don't see this Raiders defense stopping anybody right now, and he's just on the field all the time, so.
Yeah, it's one of those things we keep mentioning is those snaps and those targets, and that's exactly what Sharp's going to see. Considering he succeeded in 2 poor matchups, 1 really bad matchup, I think in a good matchup he could really have an excellent day. So let's recap real quick what we talked about. For receivers, our top 3, Adam loves Dez Bryant, loves Amari Cooper, and Larry Fitzgerald, and I agree with him on everyone except for Cooper. I don't think that at his price he's going to be one of those plays that are worth using this week. I like Allen Robinson, Jarvis Landry, and Stefon Diggs. You can tell I love volume, I love catches. I think we both do. And we both agree that all 3 of those guys are definitely worth using this week. Dan talked about AB and Julio. This is going to be a big decision for a lot of players this week. Adam likes AB because the chances are, and I agree with him, very, very slim of him having 2 poor games in a row, especially this week against the Eagles secondary who, although they played well, the talent level in those cornerbacks is not very high. I would prefer Julio over him, but you can't argue with either one. I just think Julio is going to have the better game, so I have to pay up for him rather than AB. We also talked about our sleepers. Adam likes Sterling Shepherd. I like Tajay Sharp. They both combined to play about 99% of the snaps last week. So this is one of these things you want to look at. These 2 sleepers are cheap, and they have the opportunity to score a lot in good matchups, considering they're playing a lot of snaps. Let's check out RotoCurve for week 3. Be sure to go over there. There's tools, optimizers for the lineups. You have tool-based lineups with the optimizer on a replace function, so you can potentially make your own lineup based on our rankings. There's a members-only free roll, consensus rankings where you can find all of my picks, all of Adam's picks, along with 3 other DFS analysts. We even have a DFS pro making his debut at RotoCurve this week, Brian Healy. The guy's been to the last 3 live finals with 8 seats. That's incredible. He's going to have a cheat sheet, so you're going to want to check that out. Getting some picks from a DFS pro is definitely the way you want to go. Paired with all the information we've paired you, and you have a chance to have a successful week 3 in NFL DFS. I know Adam has cash game coming, cash game picks, GPP picks. He has a bargain play up. We have 3 beefs you can look at, quarterbacks, running backs. We just talked about receivers. And get this, all this stuff under $1 a day. There is not a better bargain. You can get all the content, all the picks, all the matchups, all the tools, all the cheat sheets under $1 a day. That's 4 less nuggets for those who like to go to McDonald's or weddings. For me, I'm taking all the information. This has been the Week 3 Daily Beef for wide receivers presented by Rosters.com. For Adam Pfeiffer, I'm Josh Kalachi. Good week, good luck, and let's win some money.